Welcome to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Louisville attorney Jim Desmond has been handling injury cases related to traffic accidents for over 20 years. Jim will provide valuable information to help you and your family. He wants you to understand the important issues you need to know when it comes to handling car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. There's a lot riding on this, so let's get started. All right, welcome back to the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast with Jim Desmond of the Desmond Law Office right here in Louisville, Kentucky. Today we're going to talk about no-fault coverage, and this is something that actually is kind of confusing to a lot of people. Jim Desmond's here in the office with me. My name is Jim Ray. I'm a non-attorney spokesperson, so whatever I say today, you don't really have to pay attention to, but again, whatever Jim says when he starts speaking, he's the guy, he's the attorney, he's the one you want to listen to. Hey, Jim, let's talk a little bit then about no-fault coverage. Kind of why do we have it? What is it? Why does it add so much confusion to people?
Well, Jim, I think one of the biggest things is it's misunderstood. Everybody hears the term no fault and they think, oh, I can't sue this other person for the damages they cause in a car wreck. Well, of course, that's not true. No fault coverage, from my point of view, is it's what I call the redheaded stepchild, because people in Kentucky think, oh, we don't like it. They think that it increases the auto insurance rates, and it does not. In fact, it's one of the best things we have, okay? The easiest way, let's oversimplify it for a second to start with that. It's medical expense coverage. You're in a car wreck, you were injured. It's $10,000 of medical expense coverage that you get immediately from your own auto insurance carrier or the vehicle you're riding on.
And it's not just you; it's also every passenger, right?
Correct. So it's not divvied up. So it's $10,000 per person of medical expense coverage for every person in that vehicle.
So you're sitting up front, you're driving, you've got a broken leg, maybe you've got a head or neck injury. The person in the back seat, maybe they've just got some bumps and bruises. They still have up to $10,000 to use, and likewise you, even though your injuries are much more severe. This just talks about that initial burst of cash that's available to help you get medical treatment.
Right. I won't even say it's cash. Remember, think about it, like I said, as health. I say health insurance coverage. It actually covers lost wages and some other elements we'll talk about in a minute. But yes, it is basically health insurance coverage through your own auto insurance company is the easiest way to think about it. The whole idea behind it is, if I'm injured, just like you just described, if I'm a driver of a vehicle and someone else caused the accident, well, I shouldn't have to show fault on that other person to be able to basically get my medical bills paid. I shouldn't have to worry about whether I can go to the emergency room or not.
Because that proof of fault, that determination is going to be made down the road.
That's for pain and suffering and recovering on your property damage, all these other issues. This is for no fault. It's if you were injured in a motor vehicle accident in Kentucky, 99% of the time you're entitled to what we call no-fault insurance, and it's also referred to as basic reparation benefits, no-fault insurance, personal injury protection, PIP, 4 or 5 different names.
It's all the same thing.
Yep.
Just call it. Now, you're also licensed in Indiana, and Indiana is different. And here in a little bit, we'll get into Indiana, but Indiana does not have this system. So this is not something that every state has. This is specific to Kentucky.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, and there's some other no-fault states, but correct. Indiana's not a no-fault state. It's what we call a MedPay state. The biggest thing for you to understand about that is, again, MedPay is health insurance coverage through your own auto insurance, but it's not automatic. You got to purchase it ahead of time. So, and it doesn't cover other elements. I mentioned no fault, for example, covers lost wages. It doesn't cover those type of things.
Hey, if I'm on vacation and I'm a Kentucky driver, Kentucky insured driver, and I go down to Florida and I get in a wreck in Florida, do I still have PIP coverage?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
you bought it, you paid for it through your own insurance company. Absolutely.
And I can get treatment down there before I come home. I mean, but
Sure.
It doesn't really matter. It's the fact that I'm insured. I've got it.
Right. Well, and I'm kind of glad you used that example a little bit, because you said about the treatment before you come home. The standard is if the treatment is reasonable and related to the car wreck, the no-fault carrier owes the medical expense coverage. Okay, so and that's kind of a fancy way of saying they owe the bill. They got to pay it.
Right, up to that $10,000 under
Correct.
This no-fault coverage.
Right. So again, if you're in Florida and you were in a car wreck and you said, hey, I want to get everybody checked out, but I'm worried about health insurance and networks, it's like none of that stuff applies. I'll tell you right now, go to emergency room, get checked out while you're down there. We would deal with the medical bills later on, and we'd have that no-fault coverage to fall back on.
And actually, we've talked about this in a previous episode, but again, getting medical treatment of some sort creates a medical record, so there's some documentation that you did get checked out. You do maybe have some injuries documented or some aches and pains.
And that's what you have to do, because, this is the lousy part about car wrecks, okay, is, some people say they don't want to proceed with anything. Okay, I get that. But you have to act like it from day one and you've got to cross your T's and dot all your I's. Because let's say you do decide to do a personal injury claim. Well, again, you have to have the medical records backing it up. Okay, well, let's say you don't want to do a personal injury claim, and you just say, okay, I'm going to do a no-fault claim. Well, you could do that, but let's say you wait for 30 or 45 days after the accident before going to your first medical treatment. You're still giving that no-fault carrier some information, or more correctly, some defenses to your claim saying, hey, maybe these medical bills aren't in fact related to the car wreck.
You could have fallen down the stairs. You could have hurt something at work. You could have done something totally different, unrelated to that automobile accident. So again, get treated early, at least to start a physical record, a medical record.
Yes, if you need it, absolutely get treatment, get the medical record, because again, the defense is the same. I mean, let's go back to something, and again, I'm not going to badmouth insurance companies, but what is the job of an insurance company? It's to settle a claim for the least amount of possible and go on to the next claim, okay? Well, whether it's no-fault coverage or liability coverage or pain and suffering, whatever you're dealing with, they're still going to assert defenses and say, hey, we don't owe this money, because if they don't have to pay out money for a medical bill, again, that's more money in their bottom line.
You have built a pretty good size of your practice, a pretty good segment of your practice dealing with motorcycle accidents, motorcycle injuries. This isn't exactly the same regardless of what kind of vehicle you're on. If you're on a motorcycle, you're in a bit of a disadvantage here. Do you want to kind of unpack that for everybody?
They lose out immediately. Motorcyclists lose out immediately. That's the worst part about
this. So there
is
no fault or PIP coverage for a motorcyclist?
Right. Well, let me. That's correct. But let me take a step back, okay? And let's go back to the car stuff and then come back to the motorcycle. The law says we get in a car wreck, we have $10,000 of no-fault coverage to cover our medical bills. Okay, medical bills and lost wages and some other elements, but those are the two primary ones. So the law says we immediately have this $10,000 of medical expense coverage, okay? The law says in exchange for that right, we give up the right to recover that first $10,000 in medical bills. It becomes the right of the insurance company, okay? So this is why people will say to me, well, a car wreck, they'll say, I wasn't at fault for the wreck. Why are you trying to use my own car insurance? And the reason is I don't have a choice, okay? I can go, let's say, God forbid, Jim, on the way home today, you're hit by somebody insured with Safe Auto. Well, I could say to them 6 months from now, give me $5,000 for Jim's pain and suffering claim and pay his $3,000 in medical bills. And they'll say, we'll pay you the $5,000, but we won't pay you the $3,000 in medical bills because they don't legally owe it, okay? Anything that could be paid under no-fault coverage, we lose the right to recover as an individual, okay? That was a long, complicated answer, but it needed to be there for a reason, okay?
But again, coming back to the motorcycle driver.
I'm going there. All right. So if you drive around, all right, here, I'll give you a tip. If you drive around without car insurance and you think there's not a penalty, this is one of your biggest penalties. And that is the law says you cannot recover the first $10,000 of your medical bills. So if you don't have a no-fault carrier there on your vehicle, okay, because your car is not properly insured, you can't recover that first $10,000 of your medical bills or lost wages, even though the accident wasn't your fault, all right?
So the money you thought you were saving, you just gave it back.
Right. Now let me go on to motorcycles finally. Okay, I apologize to do that to you. But the law, this is the part that's so unfair for a motorcycle rider. The law treats a motorcycle rider as if they're uninsured. And they say, look, as soon as you get on that motorcycle, you not only are not allowed to recover your no-fault coverage, unless you specifically purchase it, and most motorcyclists don't because it's very expensive, okay? But in addition, you can't recover the first $10,000 of your medical bills from the other person, okay? I'm gonna probably go off from your time frame a little bit because I want to go so much into motorcycles. I just had this exact case where I was making a claim against the liability carrier, and they were very candid with me, and their evaluation was about $5,000 away from their policy limits. And the reason it was because, again, they didn't owe the first $10,000 in medical bills, okay? So as much as I was presenting claims in that case, I think for $29,000 in medical bills, they only had to consider 19, okay? So on a motorcycle, let me expand on that a little bit. If you're a motorcycle rider or passenger, you are not entitled to no-fault coverage, period, unless you bought it, okay?
Even if I'm a passenger, I'm not related. My buddy and I jump on his bike, go down the road, he gets in a wreck.
For the most part, you're not entitled to no-fault coverage,
okay.
Correct?
Okay.
But the way you did it, I might try to look back at your auto insurance, make it apply, but typically the answer will be no. There'll be exclusion. The part that confuses a lot of motorcycle owners is that they'll see this thing called Pedestrian PIP. and they'll think that covers them. It doesn't. Well, the whole thing about no-fault insurance is the other thing. It's the vehicle that you're riding in is the no-fault carrier. Well, if you're a pedestrian, it's the vehicle that comes into contact with you that hits you. Okay. Well, all Pedestrian PIP is saying, look, if your motorcycle hits a pedestrian, we're going to pay them up to this $10,000 again, and this is why we're charging you an extra $50, $60 a month, whatever it might be for that Pedestrian PIP.
So Pedestrian PIP covers the person you might hit
Correct.
walking down the street, not you, not your passenger.
Right. It does not cover the motorcycle driver or rider. The other little part, though, I want to kind of go back into this a little bit because, again, I see a lot of attorneys even get this point wrong. If there's another little exception in the law, but it's really important if you ride a motorcycle, okay? If you have a passenger, you can recover the first $10,000 of your medical bills from the other person who is at fault, okay? In other words, you're not penalized. The passenger is not penalized on a motorcycle. The driver is penalized.
So, okay, you and I, we jump on your motorcycle. We're going down the road. We're going to go see a movie or something like that. We get into an accident. I can't go as a passenger on this motorcycle. I can't go after your no-fault coverage, but I can go after the other car's no-fault coverage.
Nope.
Nope.
Sorry.
All right, back it up.
I know I messed
backing
you.
it. That's okay.
You were close. You can recover the medical bills, okay, from the other person's insurance company, okay? So without any offset. So in other words, I just gave you an example of, I had $29,000 in bills for a client and they only considered 19. In your case, because you're a passenger, they will consider the full $29,000 in medical bills, okay?
Okay, so that exemption's not there.
Correct. In my case, because I'm a driver, okay, they won't consider that. They'll only consider 19.
Okay.
It's lousy. They're treating you as if you're uninsured. You're a motorcycle operator. You have your bike lawfully insured, but they're treating you as if you're driving a car down the road and have no insurance on it. That same penalty that applies to uninsured drivers applies to motorcycle owners who have a vehicle, or a motorcycle more correctly, properly insured.
And I guess the rationale for that as an insurance carrier is, hey, that's a dangerous vehicle versus a car. There's a little bit more risk there. Is that the argument they're going to try to make? I mean, is that inherent to that?
I'm smiling right now. The audience can't see that because I'm like, I want to be a little more negative toward insurance companies and lobbies and lobbyists and politicians. And I think, yes, you're accurate that was when the Motor Vehicle Act was passed, that was the logic behind it, even though I think it's completely unfair to a motorcycle rider.
Agreed. Okay. Well, okay. So I've got this ability to access $10,000 worth of money out there to pay for some bills. Talk to me about what's actually covered. What are some of the things that I can actually use that $10,000 to pay for? Obviously, if I've got a broken bone and I go to the doctor's office, I go to the ER or whatever, that kicks in. But what are some of the other things that come into play?
The thing I'll tell people most of the time, 90% of the cases is going to use two elements, okay, of it. The medical bills and lost wages, okay? Lost wages are limited to $200 a week unless you bought what you call optional no-fault coverage through your own insurance company, which you can do. And for example, on an automobile, it's not that expensive. On my own car insurance policy, I have optional no-fault coverage.
It's just another layer of coverage for you.
Yeah, well, instead of having just $10,000, I think I've got $30,000. So I've got $30,000 of medical expense coverage in addition to my health insurance coverage through my automobile company. And in addition to that, it increases the weekly lost wage that I can claim from $200 to, I think, $600 in that case. Those are the two big ones that most people are going to use. Okay.
Can I overbuy that? Let's say I only bring home $300 a week. Mm-hmm. Can I buy, in your case, $600 worth of coverage per week?
Sure. They're not going to. They don't question what I make.
Okay, so that's okay.
And you say, can you overbuy it? I'm going to tell anyone, no, you can't, because the fact that it usually, one, is pretty cheap. Okay. They don't think you're going to use it, and then two, remember, it gives us so many options, and I don't want to get totally into this because we're going to talk about it in another episode, but we've talked before about reserving health insurance or reserving no-fault coverage and using health insurance to pay your medical bills to reduce, large medical bills. Those are all bigger options that we have. So it gives us a lot of different ways to kind of play with it in a personal injury settlement. So again, Added no-fault coverage, uninsured motorist coverage, and underinsured motorist coverage are the three coverages that protect you when you're not at fault. And I say you can't overbuy any of those three.
Okay. So coming back to what's actually covered by this PIP or this no-fault coverage, medical bills, and we just talked about lost wages. What else?
Replacement lost services is not used as much. Good example.
What would be an
Well,
example?
your doctor, you've got the broken hip. I think you went to that example, or broken leg, and you usually cut your lawn during the summer. Well, instead you got to hire a guy at $40 a week, okay? So we get a note from your doctor saying, obviously, he doesn't want you to cut your lawn, and we get the receipts from the guy who does, and we submit that under your no-fault coverage, so you can get back your $40 a week.
Okay.
There are some other things that cover there's a little bit of funeral expense coverage. There's also
So if there's a death in this wreck, if there's a death involved, a wrongful death is what you would call
it'll
it.
cover a little bit. It's usually $1,000, and then there's what you also call survivor benefits, which it gets a little more complicated. But the idea is, well, I'm trying to do survivor benefits right now in a case with child support, where the deceased owed child support because his kids were still under 18. So we're trying to get that no-fault coverage paid to basically the mother through what we call survivor benefits.
As an offset for that child support arrearage? Or
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
So,
okay, so that's what it covers, and we know we've got, again, up to $10,000 of no-fault coverage in Kentucky. How does the money actually flow? I mean, walk us through how do we get access to it? How do we start that process? Okay, so we had a wreck at noon today. Take me from there.
first step usually, and if I'm hired, then I'll do it, but usually the individual will do it. It's fine either way. When you report it to your insurance company, most people call their insurance company and they're just thinking about the car, okay? The only little additional step is to say, look, I want to open a no-fault claim or a personal injury protection claim. It's the same thing, okay? They're going to assign a no-fault adjuster to that claim. So one, you probably want to get that person's name. Two, they're going to give you a claim number, okay? You always want to keep that claim number. That's kind of the key reference point. They will usually send you a no-fault application. And a no-fault application it's kind of a fancy word and a fancy document for a medical authorization, okay? Because the idea is that a no-fault carrier does not pre-authorize anything like a health insurance does. It doesn't say, okay, yes, you can go to the chiropractor for 20 visits. Instead, it says, we're going to look at these bills, and if they're reasonable and related to the car wreck, we owe them. Well, how do they do that? They use that no-fault application, that medical authorization, to get the medical records and bills and review them. The no-fault application, I always feel for my clients a little bit. I'll send it to them, and I'll make X's. I'll say, sign it here, fill it out the best you can. And usually they won't fill out most of it, which is fine, because I'll fill it out because it has these crazy questions that you'll see on it that will say, well, have you rejected your no-fault coverage, pursuant to the Motor Vehicles Act? And 99% of the people, the answer is no. Will you have more medical expenses? The answer is yes, but unknown. So there's a lot of these little questions that kind of throw people off.
And again, if you're their attorney, you're going to fill this out anyway. You'll probably do it over the phone with them, but you'll get all this processed.
Sure.
It just kind of, they've got other things to worry about at that
Right.
point.
And that's what I tell people too. That that's another little tip that somebody can use for anybody who has an attorney. I always say, look, if you get a form you don't know what it's about, fill it out the best you can. Send it back to me, or in this case, your attorney. Okay. In my case, it stays in my file if I don't like it. If it's something that I do need or whatever the insurance company needs, then I'll make whatever corrections I need to and I forward it on. So it kind of takes that concern out of it. But now you got a no-fault adjuster. You've got a no-fault claim number.
Right.
Now you go to your doctor, okay? And some doctors, I'll come back to that in a second. But what you're going to do to say to your doctor is, look, I was in a car wreck. This is my insurance company. This is the contact information, and here's the claim number. They should bill that no-fault carrier directly, okay?
Perfect.
They shouldn't be hollering at you. They shouldn't be asking you for money up front.
So it should take you out of the middle.
Yeah, and that's what the part I was starting to get in a little bit is, okay, there's two extremes in doctors when it comes to no-fault coverage, because if they don't do it all the time, then they don't necessarily want to be involved in it. So a lot of you might go to your family doctor and he says, I don't want to deal with it because it's a car wreck, okay? Or you go to attorneys, or you go to a doctor that normally does have a lot of no-fault cases. He doesn't mind it because there's a little thing that people don't know. If a doctor bills out $100 for a visit under no-fault coverage, they typically will get paid $100 or close to that. That's the whole concept. If Anthem gets that same bill through your health insurance, of course, they're going to pay about $50.
Right.
So if you have a doctor that is willing to treat you under the no-fault coverage, yes, he gets paid more money. So it can be to his benefit. The problem is sometimes it's a question of who's actually going to get paid under the no-fault coverage. It's dealing with attorneys, which, not every doctor likes to do. We're both smiling right now in the response to that comment, obviously. But yes, the doctor should be willing to bill them directly. And if they ask you, if they say pay it up front and you go get the money back from the no-fault carrier, I'll tell you to find another doctor usually.
Okay. Well, let's play a game. Let's say, okay, I know I've got $10,000 potentially out there. Could I get together with my buddy and we have a slight fender bender, which really we're just kissing bumpers more or less, and then I can fill out this and get 10 grand in my pocket? I mean, why doesn't that happen? Because
it's not your money. It's health. Go back to what we said in the beginning. It's health insurance coverage. It's think of it no differently than if you went to the hospital and you put down your Humana card. That's really kind of what it is.
So there's really not an opportunity for me to, in most cases here, get money in my pocket. This is going to be to pay bills. And
95% of the cases.
Okay.
There are a couple little tricks that I will do sometimes when the medical bills are huge, or if I'm dealing with a motorcycle accident, because generally those injuries are so much worse than the coverage. But no, for the average person, they should think of no-fault coverage as covering your lost wages and your copays and your deductibles from your health insurance. It can do that. So again, if you get a situation that, let's say you went, all right, let's go back to your other example, Jim. You had that broken leg and you were in the hospital 3 days. We know your bill is going to be big, right? We might reserve that no-fault coverage or let your health insurance pay it. Now those copays and deductibles from that hospital stay, that can be submitted to your no-fault carrier. So that's a little bit of an advantage to you.
So again, that's less out of pocket that I've got to pay.
Exactly.
In dealing with this. Okay.
Exactly. So there's ways. That's why you said earlier about can you overbuy it? I'm like, no, because it gives us so many options.
Right. Well, okay, let's switch a little bit to Indiana. Indiana doesn't have no fault. They have a system called MedPay. And as you alluded to earlier, as a driver in Indiana, you've actually got to buy or purchase that coverage in advance. Okay.
Correct.
Can you walk us through that?
Well, I mean, that's the gist of it. Assume it's going to cover your medical bills. I'm going to oversimplify it again.
Sure.
But it's going to cover your medical bills. You can purchase none. You can purchase 1,000, 5,000, or 10,000. Okay, there's a lot of different ones we've seen lately. The average seems to have finally gone up over the years, about 10,000, which is good. Okay, but again, you have to purchase it. Then you get into issues of also who's covered under it. Now that's too specific to even go here right now because it would really depend upon the policy. Most policies will probably be written that it's going to be, again, almost like a no-fault carrier where it's going to cover everybody in the car, okay? But it may or may not.
Okay, there could be exclusions or hey, you're not a family member, you're just one of the friends riding along. I mean, could that be potentially what would happen?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And normally I don't see that, but I'm not going to tell you that sometimes it can't. Yeah, he's giving me a thumbs up because he's catching it. Future lawyer Jim Ray.
It's only been 12 years, brother. No, okay. So again, with MedPay, that's a little bit different over there. And if an Indiana driver has a wreck on this side of the river, maybe they want to come over to the beautiful side of the.
Oh, that's fun. Oh, you went there. Okay.
Okay. Well,
go ahead. Now finish your example.
Okay.
I'll cut you off.
So somebody from Indiana comes over and they go to the U of L game and they get in a wreck over there on Main Street. What happens? Is it MedPay still? I mean, does it follow them like our no fault would cover us down in Florida?
I'm gonna say something because you saw me cut Jim off and get a little excited. This is the geeky side of me. This is the part that I embarrass my children when we go out to like a store and somebody brings up a car wreck and they're like, "Oh my God, Dad, will you just shut up?" So when I say about call me on the cell phone, I'm like, "That's fine. I like talking about this stuff. I know I'm weird in that regard." So, but let's get to the point. What I loved what you said is, okay, look, you come from another state and you come in Kentucky and you get in a car wreck. First big concept that's, again, the case 99% of the time. If you have a car wreck in Kentucky, you are entitled to no-fault coverage. 99% of the time, that is a true statement, okay? So now you came over the river. It gets a little complicated, but the first thing is, yes, you're entitled to no-fault coverage, okay?
Because the accident happened in Kentucky.
In Kentucky. That's how Kentucky works. Kentucky says, hey, you're in our boundaries. It happens. We're going to find a way to get you this no-fault coverage. And I could go into things like priority of insurance companies and Kentucky Assigned Claims Plan and all this other stuff that we could do if we needed to get it done. But the bottom line is, if you're in an accident in Kentucky, you're entitled to no-fault coverage. So you tell me, for example, that you're with Indiana Farmers. Well, I know Indiana Farmers doesn't do business in the state, okay? So I'm going to have to do one of these other procedures to get you this no-fault coverage, but I'll do it and we'll get it. Well, not only will we have the no-fault coverage, but you purchased $5,000 of MedPay coverage on that policy. So I can get you the no-fault coverage, then I can go against the MedPay coverage if you have that much in bills. So instead of just having, for example, $5,000, we'd probably have $10,000 of no-fault and another $5,000.
So that's stackable in that regard.
In that regard, it's stackable. I hate using that term because
Right.
it's a different
Refers to
reason.
something different, yeah.
But in contrast, you're insured with my least favorite company, Allstate, okay? The one company that if you do have, I will tell you to find another company. If they want to sue me over that, so be it. But if you're insured with Allstate, they do business in the state. So now they're required to basically, according to law, they're required to honor our no-fault provisions. So your $5,000 of MedPay would switch and become $10,000 of no-fault. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So there are some nuances there. They're important. And at the end of the day, the best thing to do if you're in an accident, go ahead and get an attorney who understands this area of law. Don't call your family law attorney. Call a personal injury attorney who knows what they're doing, because all these nuances matter at the end of the day.
Right. I agree with 100%. And again, I'm not bad-mouthing any other attorneys, but I don't know if we talked about this the first time, but, I got divorced years ago, and the second half of my divorce I handled on my own. And, as I tell people, I'm in family law, I'm a good B- student, but it's like you don't want to hire a B- attorney. If I have a family law case, I'm going to refer that to a good friend of mine who does it all the time, and he's an A student. So personal injury, and I've said this before about lawyers, okay? Let's call the elephant out in the room. Personal injury is the most lucrative area of the law out there, okay? Car accidents tends to be the most common and most lucrative. So again, you want to find somebody that does this kind of business regularly, because otherwise, you don't know what you're getting.
Right. Well, okay, so let's transition. In each episode, we try to have a segment at the end here called So This Happened This Week. And that kind of gives you a chance to kind of go back and talk about something that happened that may be related to this topic, although not necessarily, but it's another opportunity for them to understand how you treat the clients and how you deal with certain cases and certain issues as they come up. You wanted to talk a little bit about a motorcycle case that you're working on, so take it away.
I think we talked about the same case a little bit in the first one. It's a fascinating case because this is the one that the investigator tracked down, the vehicle that pulled in front of my client, and but for doing that, we wouldn't have been able to make a claim. Well, the short story, the other part that's kind of come up this week is we were able to settle the pain and suffering claim. I've placed an escrow, my escrow account, which is I don't get any interest off it or anything else. It's monitored by the the Kentucky Bar Association. Money to cover what we call a health insurance lien. Well, the client initially didn't have health insurance on this, okay? And he didn't have no-fault insurance either. Why? Because he was on a motorcycle. He didn't know to put it on there. So the bottom line is we said, how are we going to get these medical bills paid? Well, luckily, we talked about it, and I sent him back to the financial counselors at this hospital, and they got him to qualify for Medicaid. Well, Medicaid is going to pay the bills. They have a right to recover their money back. That's the health insurance lien we keep talking about, okay? But again, they're going to take these large bills and they're going to reduce it substantially. And that amount that they reduce it to is what they have a right amount to recover, okay? In this case, it's interesting because I've been talking to them and they haven't paid all the medical bills yet. So they have given me a total. I have sent them off a check because I got the case settled. If they cash that check, they're over and done with, okay? Because my obligation, not even my obligation, my client's obligation is not to impair a health insurance lien. It's not to stand in the way or surrender their rights, okay? It's not to make sure that they get paid back every dollar they're owed, okay? And I don't mean to be like that, but whether it's Medicaid or insurance companies, that's their responsibility. They set up all this stuff. They're in the business of making money. That's what they've got to do. They need to tell us what is related and what they think is owed. Now, of course, we're going to contest it sometimes. But it's kind of an interesting case because, again, we had a case where all the medical bills would have probably eaten up the total insurance coverage. We got those medical bills reduced. We got more insurance coverage than we initially thought because we've tracked down a driver that we didn't expect to find. And now we just have to deal with a little health insurance lien. So the client's ecstatic. So.
Well, let me ask you this. And this is bound to come up. I mean, I've got a nice car. Somebody hits me. I've got all these problems now. What actually happens to the at-fault driver? I mean, do they get arrested? What happens there?
No, they don't get arrested, not unless there's a criminal law. Again, or a criminal violation. You've got to go back and say, look, there's two types of law. Go back to above everything, civil law and criminal law. Okay, civil law, it's everything from family law to personal injury to real estate, all that type of stuff. Criminal law is just like it sounds. It's brought by the state, and you're facing either jail time or penalties. Well, if a drunk driver hits you, absolutely. Okay, that drunk driver is subject to criminal penalties. Okay, and we use those criminal penalties in that case to help improve the pain and suffering claim, which is part of the civil law. Okay, but if I go rear end somebody, and God forbid, but I give them $100,000 in medical bills. No, that's the problem. Is there's nothing. I'm criminally. If I wasn't drinking, if I wasn't acting recklessly, then I can't be charged with anything.
Right. It's a collision. It's not a criminal act.
My rates are going to go up. I guess I could be sued beyond my insurance coverage, which is a whole nother thing we will cover in another podcast sometime. But realistically, that's what the worst that's going to happen is my insurance rates are going to go up if I have the right kind of insurance and I have the right amount, so to protect things.
Well, that makes sense. Hey, Jim, I want to thank you for your time, and for everybody listening, once again, I want to thank you for your time in investing the past 30 minutes here, listening to us talk a little bit on the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Once again, every 2 weeks, you'll see a new episode, so be sure to keep an eye out, and by all means, remember, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, and that just gives you a notification that a new episode is available for you. It doesn't cost anything, doesn't put you on a mailing list or anything like that, but we surely would appreciate it. So, hey, again, thank you for your time, Jim. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks with episode 4.
Thanks very much, Jim. Take care.
You got it. Take care. That's it for this episode of the Kentucky Auto Accident Podcast. Jim Desmond will be back in 2 weeks to provide information you need to know related to car accidents and motorcycle wrecks in Kentucky. Until then, check out AttorneyDesmond.com. You can also follow him on Facebook at Attorney James Desmond. Drive safely, and please remember to buckle up.